Hi, in this video we're going to take a look at the SUMIF function in Excel. It's widely used and it's pretty straightforward. You use it when you don't want to sum up all the values in a range of cells, but instead you want to just add up the ones which meet one specific criteria. So let's take a look. So here's my list of groceries again, and you can see that plums appears twice in the item column. So if I wanted to add together the numbers sold for plums, I'd have to add this cell and this cell together manually. And so this is where the SUMIF formula comes into effect. Let's have a look at the syntax of the SUMIF formula. So in example one, I want to do exactly that. I want to sum the number sold for plums. So if I type in equals sum if and tab, you can see here that it asks for three different arguments. The first one is the range. So that's the range of cells you want to look at to assess the criteria for. So in this example, that is going to be this range of cells here. So it's first of all saying, look at these range of cells. The next thing it wants is the criteria. So the criteria is what do you want to apply to those range of cells to do something. So the criteria here is if those range of cells have in it the criteria or the word plums. If you put in text, you need to put them in quotes. And then the next argument is saying, what do you want me to sum if I can see the word plums in that range of cells B3 to B8? And I want it to sum these cells here, C3 to C8. So this formula is saying sum C3 to C8, that's the sum range, if you see the word plums in the range B3 to B8. That you see comes back with a 75, which would be these two plums added together. So I'm going to look at another example. This time I want to sum the numbers sold column for any items which are greater than 20 numbers sold. And I put in equals sum if tab. Now my range this time is going to be look in this range here. My criteria needs to be in quotes again because I'm asking something mathematical. So anything mathematical, a mathematical equation or text needs to be in quotes. So anything greater than 20. At this time, I'm not going to put in my third argument of sum range, because if you see here that in brackets you've got the sum range, which means it's not a required argument. And if you don't put it in, it will use your initial range, in this case it's C3 to C8, as the sum range. So that's why we don't need it in this case. I just close my bracket. You can see it's got the 115. So what it's doing there is it's looking here in this column for anything that's greater than 20, then summing that same range for all the items over 20. So it should be picking up the chilies, pepper, and the plums. That's my 115. So another look at searching for a wildcard for text. So in this case, I want to sum the number sold if the item contains the letter P. The formula I'm going to put in here, I've written the syntax here if you want to follow it, equals sum if. My range that I wanted to look at are these items. My criteria, I'll just look at the syntax here, the criteria I'm going to put in. My criteria is that it has a P in it, so that it has spacings either before or after P, but just that it contains letter P. And you do that by using the asterisks to denote the wildcard. And then I want it, if it has got letter P, to sum the number sold range. You can see you get the number 120. So what that's doing is adding the items for plums, pepper, and the grapes. And that's the 120. Okay, let's look at a fourth example now, which is very similar, but in this instance, I don't want to sum just anything that contains the letter P. I want it to sum the items which start with the letter P. So very similar, put equals sum if. So I want it to look at that range of items. My criteria this time is going to be, here's the syntax. Instead of putting a wildcard, an asterisk in front of P, I want it to start with the letter P. So my item can start with the letter P and have any letters thereafter. This is slightly different from the syntax above in my example 3. And that's what I want it to sum. 110, so anything starting with P. So there is picking up the plums, the pepper, and the plums again, but it's ignoring grapes, which obviously doesn't start with P. That's how I get to my 110. So syntax difference there is I've only got an asterisk or a wildcard after the P, so it has to start with P. Whereas my earlier example was it can have P within the item itself. One quick thing to note, the range cannot be fewer than the cells in the sum range. So what that means is, let's just go back to this example up here. My range is B3 to B8, and my sum range is also C3 to C8, i.e. the rows are also 3 to 8. And look what happens here if I put in C3, let's say, to C4. You can see the sum range is now only on C3 to C4. And so it's not, the sum range hasn't got the second plums. Let's see what happens when I do that. It still comes back with a 75. It is actually bringing in this 55 for the second plums. And that's because it assumes, or it takes precedent, the first range. Let's do it the other way around though. Let's say that my range only goes to row 4 and my sum range goes to 8. Then it will only pick up what's in these first 2 rows. So in other words, the range takes precedent over the sum range. So that's just something to note and look out for. You should always, it's best practice to have your rows being equal in length to the range, but otherwise the range takes precedent. I just want to show you what happens if in the sum range cells it has either blanks or text. So this time I'm going to put my formula in using the FX button. So search SUMIF, go find SUMIF, I select it, and so my range is going to be my usual range. My criteria is going to be if it's plums. Actually here, let's just like variation, that's my criteria. You can reference a cell, so if you can see, if I point that to the plums in that cell, it will still come up with the syntax of plums, and sum range is going to be those cells there. Press OK. So I get my 75, which is what we've seen over here. 75. So at the moment it's going to add together these plums here. Now let's see what happens if I put in some text. Absolutely nothing. So I just wanted to show you that it doesn't upset the formula if you have text in the cell range. Equally, if it's blank, it doesn't upset it. Now, lastly, what I want to show you is a slight drawback of the SUMIF formula, and that's what if we wanted to sum for the number of items sold for anything which is called plums, but also anything which is over 20. So you can't do that. There's two lots of criteria there, and the way you would do that is using the SUMIFs plural formula. So let's have a look at that very quickly. SUMIFs in this case, and you can see what it will want. Firstly is to know what range you want to sum if the criteria are met. Then it wants to know the criteria range of range 1. And this is going to be this range here. So if that range has plums, and secondly, that range is greater than 20. That's my formula for those two criteria. It's saying what range to sum, C3 to C8, if, and these two are linked, and these two are linked. First of all, if this range, the items basically has the word plums in it, but also if this range is greater than 20. You see it's brought back 55, so it's ignoring this one, and it's just picking up this one, because this obviously is not over 20. That's a very quick look at the SUMIFs formula if you have more than one criteria. Just to highlight the drawback of the SUMIF, you can only use one criteria, but please check out my other video on the SUMIFs for greater detail. Thanks. So that's the SUMIF function, which is used when you want to just add up cells meeting one specific criteria. If you want to add up cells meeting more than one criteria, then you've got to use the SUMIFs function, and that's a whole different video. But anyway, thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye.